He said your first crime is very special, and you don't talk about it, and you keep it close to you. I'm Rebecca Morris. I'm a true crime author, and I began investigating the Anne Marie Burr and Ted Bundy link and her disappearance in 2007. It was the beginning of Labor Day weekend. She and a sister had slept upstairs in the house. Two other children slept down in the basement in their fort for the last time. She would have started third grade the next week. It stormed on the night before she disappeared, so that if there was anyone to hear that was lurking around the house or outside, they wouldn't have been heard. But it was literally a dark and stormy night. Her mother, Beverly Burr, got up early on the morning of the Friday to check on the kids. It was about 5:15 in the morning, and she saw the two kids downstairs still sleeping, but she went upstairs and Anne was missing from her bed. It very quickly became a huge police presence and a big investigation. It was difficult because there was never any report of a strange car in the area. There was a living room window that had been opened, and outside a garden bench had been pulled up to the window, so it looked like somebody had crawled in the living room window. There was a shoe print on that garden bench that was pulled up outside the window that somebody had gone into, and the shoe print on that bench was about the size of a teenager's foot. There was no struggle. There was nothing in the house that indicated a struggle of any kind. They had latched the door and left, and I think it had to be somebody she knew. Anne's father and his brother went walking around the neighborhood, obviously searching for her, and by then there were a lot of police around. One of the complications for the search was that their home was very close to the University of Puget Sound campus, and there were 7 buildings under construction that day on the University of Puget Sound campus. So there were all these construction sites and there were all these ditches. And Don Burr, Anne's father, went back to the house and told the police, "You've got to go up there and look at those construction sites because there are all these ditches." And in fact, he and his brother had seen a teenager standing at one of the ditches and kind of kicking the dirt in with his feet. They waited a few days, and by the time the police went to the campus, everything was paved over. And this is one of the clues we have to, 30 years later, or 25 years later, when Ted Bundy was hypothetically confessing to this crime. He said he stood at a ditch and then later walked over to the Burr house and watched the police presence and watched the people searching. In 1961, Tacoma police didn't really know who Ted Bundy was. He wasn't on their radar. As a teenager, he did get into some trouble in Tacoma as far as peeping Tom stuff and some thievery and shoplifting. But it wasn't until 1987, when he was in Florida and on death row, that he hypothetically confessed and told this story to people, to some journalists and also to a serial killer researcher. He told the story about this early crime of taking a child out of her house, taking her to the orchard next door, and molesting her, and then leaving her in a ditch. This is the first time that anybody ever connected the possibility of Ted Bundy to this crime, because after all, he'd only been 14 years old at the time. Ted was a paperboy in the neighborhood. He wasn't the Burr's paperboy, but he was a paperboy. And I found a childhood friend of his who knew both Anne and Ted. Anne Marie Burr's mother and Ted Bundy's mother thought that the kids didn't know each other, so why would Ted know to go to their house? But I found a couple of people who said they did know each other, that and sometimes helped him, get his newspapers. And of course, those were the days when children could just explore on their bicycles. And so that's what Anne and her siblings did. I think it's important to remember that he killed other children. His very last victim, after a string of more than 30 murders, and maybe more than 30 murders, but his last victim was a 12-year-old girl in Florida. Like other missing person cases, this made worldwide news. Even in 1961, there were sightings of her supposedly in various states, and it was not Anne. So once Ted Bundy was on the radar because he'd been talking about killing a child, Bev Burr wrote to him, and she begged him to tell her whatever he knew about Anne. And he wrote back and stood by his claim that he knew nothing about what happened to her. They corresponded several times. He would sign his letters, "Peace, Ted." Peace, comma, Ted. I think he did it. I do. I think it was Ted who crawled through that living room window. Nothing adds up like it does for Ted. It's been more than 60 years. I think it's more than a long shot that we'll ever know what really happened to Anne Burr and where her remains are. It's unsettling to not have an answer.